and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer of Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar for effective metadata strategies. It is the latest installment in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we'll be collecting them via the Q&A section. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to know, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely change that to network with everyone. To open the Q&A or the chat panel, you can find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen for those features. And to answer the most commonly asked questions, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within 2 business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and will likewise send a link of the recording of this session, as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter is an acknowledged data management authority and associate professor at the Virginia Commonwealth University, president of DAMA International, and associate director of the MIT International Society of Chief Data Officers. For more than 35 years, Peter has learned from working with hundreds of data management practices in 30 countries, including some of the world's most important. Among his 13 books are many firsts. Starting before Google, before data was big, and before data science, Peter has founded several organizations that have helped more than 200 organizations leverage data, specific savings, which have been measured at more than 1.5 billion US dollars. His latest is Anything Awesome. And with that, let me turn everything over to Peter to get today's webinar started. Peter, hello and welcome. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Now we're all set. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Shannon, rescuing me as usual, right? So good to be with you all. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And we're going to talk about one of my favorite things, which is metadata. So let's jump right in here and talk about what sort of program we have for you. Starting off with really an understanding of how metadata has to be understood in the context of the larger data management field. So that we're going to define data management. And we're going to talk about the meaning of the term using data as metadata. And the key component there is leverage for organizations. And then hopefully leave you with a teachable example out of all this so that you can explain these concepts to anybody else that happens. Then we'll go to our 4 key strategies. Key here first is not to treat metadata as a noun, but as a use of data. Then to understand that the language of data governance must constantly be focused around metadata in this. And this metadata will actually help your AIs get smarter about your data governance efforts, which is another component to all this that we'll dive into today. Repositories, technologies, things that we tell you we should do are capabilities, but not technology in of themselves. And so we'll look at how to do it on your own and see how that cyclical improvements do not start with technologies. Finally, we want you guys to not start ever from a blank sheet of paper. They're terrifying, and there's so many, many, many resources that we're going to talk through a couple of them and get you started and how to help you out with that. Finally, we'll finish up with some benefits, which is the idea that metadata defines the organization's ability to interoperate. Get about an hour from now back to the takeaways, references, and the questions and answers, and part that Shannon and I look forward to so much each week. This item, which I use as an icon for this series here, is something called the Mendium, which was these two people's attempt to categorize all the world's knowledge. Now, to figure out which card contained the bit of knowledge that you were looking for, you had to have an understanding of how the metadata was set up to do in the first place. So if you didn't know which bucket, which drawer to pull out, you would not know which card to find. And consequently, the knowledge that you had would be completely impenetrable. Well, this proved, well, interestingly enough, as a precursor to the internet in terms of its ideals, at least, it was simplified down in practice to this concept here, which is, first of all, we'll have to explain to future generations that we went to libraries because that's where things such as books and other reference materials were, and that you had to search for these useful items by going to these 3x5 index cards. and organizing each according to the card catalog, a direct descendant of the Mendium. And the cards also contain the address in the library. So this was the intersecting entity, if you will, between the knowledge that you were seeking and your ability to locate it within the confines of the library here. And of course, these bits of metadata that it put out were the what books and where they located and how you could search by author or title and subject tags, et cetera, determining which books would meet the requirements. That way you didn't have to go find the book. You could look at the card and determine whether the card was going to provide you with the right type of information as to whether this book, and it didn't solve all your problems, but it solved a lot of your problems. I know that seems inefficient to those of you that were born in the digital age. So perhaps a way of describing all of this same type of use of data at a higher level is this, which is, I'm sure, what you're familiar with, data about data. So this is the definition of metadata that many people use. I would actually go slightly differently and say metadata about your data, and that way you're going to get management's attention focused on why they should pay attention to the fact that you are managing metadata, because not all of this has been well understood. And I don't mean this just to be funny. It's actually quite sad that it's taken us this long to sort of break through. But some people think that we're the nice librarian on the left-hand side here, they're just going to label everything. And truly, I was part of a project at the Department of Defense where we were going to try to label everything within DoD with 5,000 terms. And it was an interesting exercise. It was unsuccessful. Here's another perspective on it. I don't know if this is a real far guy or not, but just label everything. It will be fine. And here's an actual Microsoft advertisement. Again, not clear exactly what they were describing from a data perspective here, but of course, where they were describing it doesn't need any description beyond that. And this has just simply led over time to data being very much like the elephant described by the blind people who each encounter it from a different perspectives. One finds it's like a fan, a snake, a tree, a rope, a wall. And data, of course, is the same way, whether you come in through a warehouse, a story, pipes, statistics, or a dashboard. Data management is sort of something that happens, but not something that you focus on. We used to call this definition, data management occurred between everything that was a source of data and everything that resulted when that data was utilized. That unfortunately didn't capture the most important aspect of data management, which is not that it is used, but that it's reused. And definitions and things like that become critically important in metadata concepts as you do this. So a better definition here of data management is we still have the sources and the reuse, which are important, but there are basically two buckets or large halves, if you will, of information, although people tend to think it's an 80-20 representation here in terms of time spent on this. But you've got things that are doing preparation of the data and exploitation of the data, as well as the formal part of data management that ensures that the data will be ready for optimal reuse when it's done. That's, of course, even more important in the cloud era that we're in right now. This is all surrounded by some sort of governance and ethical use framework and keeps us all together. The term meta describes something that is transcending, more comprehensive. And these are really the thing you want to think of in terms of metadata. If you have to look around your organization and find people who are likely managing metadata in your organization, go to your networks group or whomever you contract for your network services. Every piece of network user and access point is metadata, and likely your group allocates somebody maybe full-time on this, sometimes multiple people, this responsibility to make sure that all the devices that are logged onto your network are permitted, that locations are well-defined access points, and that you can't log on to places that are not access points. And as I said before, it belongs to an individual to keep this in case. Yeah, if I see a group of 30 people in networking, I know those days seem quaint at this point, but there was 10% of them that were doing, there's 10% of there's 10% of the group was involved in making sure this metadata was managed correctly around all of these things. So let's go directly to the term, and we spelled it wrong in the dim box here. You'll see that in just a little bit. But we started out with it as two words, metadata. Then, of course, we put a hyphen between them, and now we're to the progress to the point where we say the term is metadata, one word. Interestingly, there was a copyright on that as well. Just people used to get sued for using the term. It was silly, but gave the whole thing a challenge because people didn't know, regardless what they were doing. Key to this is understanding that from a data perspective, just like those library cards in the library, we need to get to the useful stuff. So the first question is well-organized data worth more? And you should have a quick explanation for that if you think there's likely lots of them lying around, although less so in today's era than before. But books without page numbering, alphabetical order of indices, table of contents, etc., would be certainly less useful devices. Borrowing freely from Abby Covert's wonderful example here from a wonderful book that I'll pop up here on the screen in just a second. It's the idea of information architecture for those who are not information architects. Her book is called How to Make Sense of Any Mess, and I do advertise it thoroughly. I think it's a wonderful book. I get no preference from that, but it's still, I think it's a wonderful resource. Now, the question is, would Abby's book be useful if I ripped the spine off the back of it and distributed the pages without page numbers and things like that? Of course, the knowledge would disappear quickly on that. And unfortunately, when we look around at our organizations, we find out that 80% of the organizational data falls into the category of data rot. And the question is, with a data rot perspective, which is data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial, you then have still the requirement for metadata, valid identification of each of the data assets. And metadata focuses the organizational attention on repairing common data elements. If data is just used in one place, it's not going to have quite as valuable perspective, perhaps, as the rest. It also says that value can be ascribed to the data at the necessary granular level. So this is how to go about evaluating the quality of your uses of metadata. The only argument I've ever gotten from organizations is not 80%, but 85%, 90% in one instance as well. So the question comes up, who is best qualified to decide this? And the answer has to be somebody familiar with the business aspects of metadata use around here. Now let's talk about the concept of leverage very, very briefly. As an engineering concept, we figured out that if we add more weight to the other end of a weight, we can actually lift more on it. So that may not be the right proportion there, but certainly adding more weight means we can move more with respect to our engineering and leverage concepts. And this really needs to be understood from an organizational perspective of people being able to use the organizational data. These are, of course, part of your three-tiered stool that everybody needs to have, consisting of technology. In this instance, it's showing the lever, the full lever piece, and here's the fulcrum on this side. These are the essential tools for how to utilize this leveraging approach. Another component of these three is technology people. These are your knowledge workers everywhere in the organization. Anybody who's looking for data is suffering from the effects of not optimal data management practices. And these need to be practiced within a constraint of a process that is guided by strategy. And these processes are aspects of telling you exactly what should happen here. We know that reducing the rot in an organization from even perhaps 80% to 60%, that can result in doubling the amount of useful data that's out there. And the metadata becomes the primary means of applying that leverage to data so that you understand what, how many, what kinds of investments are worthwhile. Because of course, data leverage is a multi-use concept. It permits organizations to manage their data better, and really key in support of the mission, whether that's within or across partnerships, it enables that partnership to be leveraged based on metadata, focusing on the non-rot data. The bigger the organization, the more potential impact occurs out there. I'm going to treat data more simultaneously. Excuse me, I said, let's skip that piece. Simultaneously in a way that permits you to look at it from two different perspectives. The first one is lower IT costs. The second was increased knowledge worker productivity. So we'll finish up each section with one of these. Do we have information to answer a question? And the answer to that is yes, if the metadata that we maintain about this yields the specifics for this class of data assets. In this instance, we're saying yes. What is the quality of these assets? Well, they are not suitable for something. What will it cost to improve this class? Well, we could say 35 cents a piece. And if we're getting a penny value out of each one, 35 cents would not be worth the cost. Can the assets be provided at a more granular level? And in this case, the answer is not easily. That may not be the right answer. The key to this, of course, is, like I said before, we spelled metadata incorrectly in the DEMOC that was released, but it's part of one of the 11 practice areas that comprise our data management body of knowledge. Here's a close-up of all of that, which is a look at this from a context perspective. In here, we have a definition, series of goals, series of inputs, activities, deliverables. Again, I won't run through each of these, but you can get an idea of how important it is to take a look at them. I do want to leave you with this section, though, with a usable example. And the example is an MP3 player. Certainly you have one on your phone, on your computer, on your tablet. And if you can remember back to the old days where us geezers would insert a CD into the computer. I know most computers don't even have a CD player here, but I'm going to take you back in history, and there are analog, of course, equivalents all over the place. The CD player could only describe certain information from the CD, the music metadata, if you will. If you inserted that CD, the music app could count the number of tracks. There were 25 on the one I sent in, and they determined the length of each track. That was the metadata that was on that particular CD after it was inserted. Well, you might move to the next phase of this, which is to say that if your internet connection was functioning, it would access something called the Grace Notes Media Database. And it would go out there and change all of those track 25s to the actual titles of them based on the fingerprint, if you will, of that particular album. And it sure would be a pain to type in all of that information. Yes, it would. Much of the fun of having a good music app would be gone, given that. Now I could take the next piece to organize this. I might say I'd like to have all my Miles Davis in one particular folder. So I create a new smart list for the artist name containing Miles Davis, and it'll scan through all of my music and find them. And surprise, surprise, it did. It found an album that I didn't expect to find. I already had brought this one off of iTunes a while back and forgotten completely about it. How terrible, right? So now I can refine the smart list and get the album that I want to have, if all I want to have is one of that, or if I do want to have all the Miles Davis in one place, that succeeded in a way that I would not have perhaps found this album out until I ran across it in a playlist many, many years later, which certainly has happened. You get the picture, I hope. Again, I can decide how to organize these pieces or not. But more importantly, once I've learned this set of organizing skills about metadata, I can repeat them with the same interface, the same processing models, the same data structures applied to podcasts, movies, files, books, PDF. The economies of scale were huge until Apple found it better to collect your data at an even lower level. And they broke this application apart into an application for each of the various pieces that are up there on the screen. So let's get to our metadata yield section. It yields valuable information about your music or your MP3 assets. Do I have these specific Miles Davis recordings? I couldn't tell if it was all called track one. Or whatever, it would not be helpful in here. So I can say, yes, I have them. What is my most played recording? It gives me an answer. How much does it cost to acquire more Miles Davis? Well, he's an expensive artist, worth $1.29. By the way, the albums are really long, so they're well worth $1.29 in the instances. Okay, so that's why metadata is so important. It's literally down to how you organize your contacts or your MP3 files personally. And of course, the better job you do with maintaining data about high performance, automated, highly architected systems, the better they will perform as well. Let's go to our 4 key effective strategies. The first is that metadata is a gerund. Do not treat it as a noun. So really key, if others don't understand you, they're going to think you're a cost. And if they understand that for every dollar they invest with Peter, it provides a $10 return on that investment, you guys would all send me lots of money if I could prove that, right? The key to understanding all of it is that all of these types of architectures are possible architectures that organizations maintain depending on the specific challenges that they have. In the case of the data part, the data is the only thing that tells you what's distributed across on-prem and cloud, and across secure applications that you're pulling in from the app cloud or wherever they happen to be coming from. This is the most useful and most documented ideas that are shared by the business and the actual systems components and the technicians around all the rest of this. So this gives an idea that each of these are going to be critical to have effective and efficient communication. It's the common vocabulary, if you will, that expresses integrated requirements. And they're set up to do this in support of organizational strategy. This gives us where most people start off with a business glossary, again, a trusted catalog, whatever you call it. It is the start of the enterprise taxonomy, should you go that direction. It identifies initial entities. If you wrap them in the right type of metadata, the AIs will understand what these are in their context. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go wrap up all of your important business terms and put them out there on the internet, but if your organization hasn't yet got its own safe copy of AI for you guys to play with at work, you're missing some huge, huge opportunities in there. At Walmart, they put the idea of metadata out that it had to do with their Spark and answering any specific combination of the center, the fact, if you will, and the outsides, which are the interrogatory questions. A wonderful example, if you need further examples, look at your inbox. Again, if you don't have the idea of who, what, where, when, why, and how, you won't be able to weed out the important stuff from the junk. Very, very critical to have that. So lots of definitions of metadata. I'm going to use the one that I focus in on here from Gartner Group, which is that metadata unlocks the value of data and therefore requires management attention. And their definition is ubiquitous. It's all over the place. So it makes a lot of sense to take a look at it. Let's take a step back before we jump right in and say that it's not a noun. Most people, if they understand it as data about the data, they think it's a certain type of data. It's not. It's the idea that you're using data of a certain type. It's a gerund, if you will. And it constitutes not something that you should look at from an external perspective as to whether you should include it, include all of it, but it should be something that is valuable. There's some of this stuff that's going to be wheat and chaff, and you don't want to maintain that. It's very, very unproductive. Now, small study that we did a while back looking at this, this was the first cataloged example of reverse engineering in ERP. And I just want to show you the uses of this. This was an organization getting a brand new ERP, and they had no real information, and the consultants hadn't shown up on premises yet. So they were forced to figure it out on their own. And they used the metadata from the system to say that the 3 places they were buying, develop workforce, 3 modules that they were buying, develop workforce, administer workforce, and compensate employees, were the main parts, with the rest of it distributed among various types of overhead along with this. And then you could actually ask for an expansion of that administered workforce and say, what's important about that? Well, clearly, at least at this point, recruiting the workforce was much more important in this instance than it was to manage competencies or plan successions around this. All this is not necessarily anything valid of the system. This is simply the number of entries that it had of the various types of this administrative metadata. Project management specialists will know what I'm talking about here, but it's just how complex they decided to write their documentation. It's an indication of something that could be right, but it's tremendously useful metadata. In the old days of describing systems, this was our hierarchical database that we used at the university for a long time. And we would actually put the student ID numbers, which were social security numbers, out there. It's all gone now. But these were very definitely some wonderful pieces. That was the type of information that was stored in this database. And this database itself that you're looking at is a hierarchical database where everything is either a parent, there's exactly one of them, or you are a child, which is one of everything else. And there's a different type of relationship. Please don't try and do this. You'll break your eyeballs if you try to understand it. Just understand that these hierarchical databases are never even taught people as possibilities of existing in our colleges and universities for the most part. It's very, very sad. They don't learn what a network database is. They don't learn that both these types of databases are an order of magnitude faster than the old style in here. So getting rid of databases and expecting it to be faster is oftentimes a very bad conclusion or a very bad assumption to base your things on. Okay, so next piece is a company that was going to propose to replace this database. Go back one here. This database structure with this database structure, whatever it happened to be. And again, it's not the idea here that there's no way that this is organized or well architected in any way that is going to be describing a useful proponent. The existence of this, the fact that it was sent out, was in itself a perfect evidence of why that metadata was incorrect. So keep in mind the focus. Is this metadata? It's not the right question to ask. Is would we obtain value from it if we include it in the scope of our metadata practices? That's where you get that value proposition. So I hope you get that. Do not treat it as a thing because you'll go around trying to identify it. Instead, employ it as a leveraging technique where it makes sense from a business perspective. Second one is to enforce metadata as the language of data governance. Very quick responses on what these words are. Here's the number 42. So I'm sorry, I went too fast on that. Number 42 may not mean anything to you if you haven't read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy turns out that white mice and dolphins are on, somebody remembers it, are part of the world, and they're thinking of us as the experiment. So they write up a gigantic plan to find out what is the meaning of life. It cranks for 300 centuries and says that us to the meaning of the world is to everybody else is 42. And they go, whoa, that's very exciting. Now, most of you are laughing. I'm glad it's exciting to some of you. It's a wonderful book. The real key to it is I've paired a meaning with 42. Here's a different 42. Anybody recognize Jackie Robinson, of course, great baseball player. That's the number you can associate with 42. My age, 24 years ago, was old enough to buy alcohol in the state of Virginia here. So there's 3 separate meanings that I've dropped onto you about data that is 42. Each one of them combines a fact and a meaning. In some cases, one or more meanings along with this. We, of course, don't want to get all of that data because it's too much to manage. So it's our job as metadata professionals to figure out what is useful and try to go after that type of information. We transform it from data to information when it is produced in response to a request. Very objective piece, which means that you can have data without information, but you can't have information without data. We get to the level of intelligence, oftentimes knowledge or wisdom are also used depending on what century we're in. But when that information is employed in strategic uses, now we can define intelligence around that. And this model is a most basic form of metadata on this. Now, our context is that organizational strategy directly supports, the data strategy directly supports the organizational strategy. It's what can we use? How can we use the data assets better to achieve organizational strategy. And that's the job of data governance. What do the data assets do to better support the strategy? And they write back and say, how well is that working? Then, of course, we have our stewards that we want to make sure that we incorporate here as well. Now, it's very important to express your metadata goals as business goals, because if the business doesn't understand what it is you're doing, it won't work. And I've already mentioned enforcing the language of data governance as metadata. Make sure that those are carried on through your stewardship community so that they can be as empowered and effective as they'd like to be. Metadata is going to give you valuable information. Do we have a shared understanding of our goals? There's a wonderful set of techniques that you can use to actually structure management's goals and make them easier to understand and clear which aligns to what in terms of data elements. Are we focused on similar goals? Yes, the answer might be. How effective are we being? Well, again, at 2 cents a piece, it's easy. And we're finding that the kind of metadata that is most valuable to the organization at this point in time has to do with the supply chain. All right. So again, use metadata to be that language. It's very easy to reverse engineer it for everybody to agree on it. Treat glossaries as capabilities, not as technology. First of all, let's talk about what you put in glossaries, which are typically described as definitions. I want you to get that out of your mindset. A bed is a piece of furniture that's used as a place to sleep, is absolutely a definition. By the way, just 2 little points. All models are incomplete without definition. Somebody shows you a picture of a model, it's not complete unless it has definitions that accompany it. You should use purpose statements instead of definitions. I'll get to that in just a second. Everything else is, all of it is metadata. When we talk about it, it's a use of the data. All right, so here's a description of a bed from a organization I was working with. It's a substructure within a room, substructure of a facility. It contains information about beds within rooms. It's got sources of information about it, a partial list of the attributes that are there, and association. Notice we were using characters at that point in time, no graphics, but nevertheless describing that 0 or many beds could be associated with a room. The status of that model, of that definition, of that everything was draft because we had not yet validated it. Important to strap that on there as well. When we understood that beds were going to track a patient, we asked the question, where was that going to occur? They said, well, each room will tell us which bed is in it. It had an RFID set of technologies. So we asked the next logical question, what room is the hallway? What room are the elevator? And found out that was not going to work. In fact, they had forgotten the bed ID as a basic attribute on the topic. Let's move. I spent 4 years with a wonderful company that had a tremendous evolution on it. They started out as a tire team and went to a time where we were in Europe. You wouldn't find a television set in a hotel that hadn't been made by Nokia. Made their way to mobile phones. Just a little bit of subplot there. Finns are bilingual in general on the occasion that they might encounter the 2% of the population that speaks only Swedish. Therefore, they all learn at least to say hello and good morning in Swedish so that they don't offend when they encounter this 2% of the population. As a company, Nokia wanted to play internationally, and so they mandated the use of English in all business settings. That is, all business meetings, regardless of where they occurred in the world, were done in English. Lots of words were unknown, and it was a wonderful process that they had put together where it was seen as culturally bad not to ask questions. If you confuse the words, it would lead to other types of confusion in the business. So they decided it was good as a culture to build a common vocabulary collectively. And when an unfamiliar term came up, the group would sit around the table and access something called the NTB to see if there was a golden definition. If not, they would vote briefly whether to submit it for inclusion in the NTB, and the NTB got together to review these submissions and weekly would produce a new version of the NTB. Clearly, there was some overhead required, but they found it easy to make a decision because this Nokia term bank became something that the organization depended upon. And when they started managing their data and their metadata, they used exactly the same technology, which results in a single web page and no need to get vendors involved in the process of putting together your first glossary around this. The problem is that most conversations are very, very challenging. The customer's level is really at a not knowledgeable level, and the vendors, of course, are quite level. So we have to find a way to get there. And that's where this do-it-yourself can be such a power. Here, for example, is the layout that you would need to build your own metadata repository. We're not going to talk about it, for goodness sakes. But what it does allow you to do is build something like this. And those of you that are astute will just grab it from the slide, right? That's what it's for. So here's a table FT underscore T underscore ABADF. And they can pop up using this metadata as a simple access database or any sort of SQL Server database, very easy to put together using the guidance that's there. And I can decide whether this column happens to be, it's one of the column details, a primary key. Does it show up in another primary table or a foreign key, looking at it? And where does it show up if it's neither in there? So gives us a good ability to look at this. It gives us really good ability to understand information assets. So we have data on this particular class of assets that we're looking at. Is the item used elsewhere? No, it's not used anywhere else. And what does it cost to acquire? Well, again, we have some numbers. We may not get them first. They may not be brilliant, but they start and they work our way towards a more refined way of understanding this. Can these data sets be shared securely? Not easily. Once again, a very good way of describing, looking at glossaries as a capability, not letting it become an IT project, and to provide value quickly. All you need are a couple of people to stand up at a meeting sometime and say, wait a minute, I think that's a really useful way of going about and getting ourselves on the same sheet of paper. Now, last piece of guidance here. Don't start building from a blank screen. No, there's nothing wrong with your television set or your screen. I did that on purpose. But same thing, you don't want to start this with a absolutely from scratch. It doesn't make sense. There's so many opportunities to collaborate, to build, to do all sorts of different things. Let's just start off with what we mean by the concept of architecture. I know this is, sometimes you're like, well, wait a minute, what does that architecture got to do with metadata? The answer's, of course, everything. So architecture is about things and the function of those things, what those things do, and how those things interact. Sometimes one goes up and the other goes down. It depends on what's actually going on and how they are. So it's important to know these three things to understand the ability to do trade-offs in architecture. These allow us, and we go through the same thing in metadata, saying that details, metadata, data use of data, organized into larger components. And this gives us intricacies that we have. Then those larger components are organized into models, introducing the concept typically of dependencies. And now we have a little bit more complexity. The models are comprised into architectures, and this gives us purposefulness, because an architecture is incomplete unless it actually, through the strategy of the organization, incorporates a purposefulness to be focused on it. So when people say, well, it's the one I've got, so it'll do, it was built with a very specific intention. And so you need to find out what that is and whether that complements what you're doing. So data structures are the same thing. Attributes represent the intricacies, the entities and objects that the decision that we've taken to move this metadata around into models is the dependency. And then the purposefulness comes up this way. Most of the time from a data architecture, you don't see something other than a diagram of this. First of all, represent or understand that this is all metadata, because we are trying to keep track of it when we look from that perspective. There have been some organizations that maintain their organizational meta model in just this kind of fashion, because it's useful enough that people do use it. This one is an example. You can see it's sort of color coded. It's actually upside down and backwards. So it's not really, don't try and read anything from it. It's not, if you're interested, I'll send me and I'll send you the original piece. And it did have a purpose on this. But the key is to make sure that it's well understood so that organizations are able to use this. And we're going to start off by understanding design patterns. When you go to a large building, this is a graphic of the largest or 11 tallest buildings in Perth in, I guess, the year 2002. But if you were in any of these buildings, you would know where the restrooms are. And the question, why are the restrooms in the same place on each floor, is pretty easy. You don't start off by putting a restroom in each place it could go in. That's the thing that belongs in a house. If they're doing it at a workplace would be insane. That said, to make it easy conceptually for everybody, they put the restrooms in the same place on each floor so that as you come off, you have a grounding and expectation of where you're going to be. Are we also concerned about electrical wiring? Yes, we don't approach each building and say we're going to start from scratch and build a perfect electrical wiring. No, we start off with pre-designed templates that have been proven over the years and improved upon through open source and other types of processes. Sometimes they're just internal to the design firm and the organization. The HVAC, the floor plan, same kinds of things. Yes, we're going to reuse as much of it as we can, start off from as strong a place as we can, because we have the ability to incorporate proven ideas, again, metadata in there, as well as specific components as we go through it. So different design patterns, spoken hub, hub of hubs, warehouse cloud, MDM, changing tires. Again, lots of different ways of looking at this gives an ability to incorporate metadata as a model before we actually get into it. There's several books that have addressed this. I wrote one with my colleague David Allen. We think we got a pretty good take on it. If you've got the ability, the book on the left-hand side, Data Model Resource Book, that's volume 3 that's showing there's a volume 2 and a volume 1 by implication. And if you can find copies of them on the internet that still have the the CD in the back of them, it's well worth buying it and a CD reader for your computer that doesn't understand generally what CDs are, because Len did a fantastic job, along with Paul, to put together a set of patterns so that you could go in and look up literally and say, I need a pharmacy data model. And by golly, they had one ready to go that you could turn, that came with the metadata, that you could turn immediately into the basis for a design and do theme and variations instead of starting from, again, that blank sheet of paper. David Hay was probably the first to think of this in this concept, data model patterns. I'm so looking forward. We're going to see him in Costa Rica at the end of the month, so a couple of weeks out. Be good to catch up with him. Again, one of the first books that looked at this at all was written by Adrian Tannenbaum, a wonderful book called Metadata Solutions that are involved in it. Just another takeaway for you. This is a description of a legacy system. In other words, you may not need all the parts of this, or you may need to do theme and variations on it, but it's a good starting place. If you examine it carefully, that's sort of a star schema around a data item that has a parallel of a stored data item so that we can actually track it to use, giving us logical and physical metadata uses within the context here. I don't mean to get so complicated, and this, of course, is going to look insane, but IBM at one point did enough metadata modeling that they felt they could describe the enterprise from top to bottom in a graphic according to this type. It's still available. The work was very, very good. Very difficult to get so many different types to buy into a strategy of this. Components, though, have proven extremely useful over the years on this. There's semi-structured data as well, which, again, everybody's going to say it's unstructured, right? It's really not. It's semi-structured data. We're going to move semi-structured data into a more structured format. Again, they're take a non-tabular and make it tabular, if you will. Gets us to that. So from a metadata models, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back a slide in there because I didn't actually talk about one aspect of it. And that is the idea that as you look at this, metadata typically involves an enhancement of this kind of data, giving us the ability to go and get more from it in a way that wouldn't go before. For example, you may decide that capturing some of this type of data in these formats would be good to enhance the customer's relationship record that you have maintained on the organization and on the individual in order to do that. Just an example of how that can go. But be careful, of course, because if somebody says, I can take unstructured data and turn it into structured data, you hand them a glass of water and say, please turn water into wine for me. It'll be useful as well. We won't get any response in either case. So just keep that in mind, that you're smarter than the average bear in this particular context in here. All right. So these patterns, again, starting positions. Do we have to create a pharmacy billing system from scratch? The answer is no. We can go directly to some of these sources and get that information. Will the software that's being proposed fit in our organization? Now, fit is a very loose way of describing a lot of technical detail, and that may be just the kind of question where this can become useful. Recall, it is absolutely considered best practice to require that whatever vendor is providing to you in the way of goods and services, give you a description of that, including a logical data model, so that you can decide whether their data model, the one that you're getting ready to adopt, will complement your existing practices, or whether there's going to be a period of adjusting that needs to be planned for, paid for, and implemented in there. Again, saying yes, that's a nice confidence. Do industry best practices exist? Yes. And I'll show you at the end there, in fact, it's against the law in the federal government not to do it correctly. Has anybody implemented a model of GDPR? Yes, of course, the answer is somebody's got it out there now, but they're charging for it. Again, metadata about whether it even exists is good. I would start off by asking AI at this point in time. So we've gone through 4 different data blocks. Metadata is a gerund, enforce metadata to be the language of data governance, treat repositories as capabilities, not starting with technologies, and start from existing components. There's lots and lots of places to start from. Let's take a step kind of back and see what this means. What describing metadata, first of all, they're saying, well, these are some they know, kind of scary, looks a little bit in there. Most importantly, it's just metadata. It's what the president said. Again, unfortunate that we didn't quite have as much awareness, perhaps, as we would like to have in there, but it is a very significant amount of overhead that goes into maintaining surveillance around this. But it nevertheless is a topic. It's just metadata is not an answer we should accept anymore. I'm now going to spend just a quick minute or two describing a business that a couple of colleagues and myself were involved in, a company called Envera. Again, true story and interesting. The president of our university at the time was excited enough about the opportunity that he invested personally in there, and that's how the involvement became on this. So let's, first of all, this is a little animation that the company would sell, and they talk about it. They say, company A talking to company B does a bunch of different things. These are the type of things that they do, and they come across in various formats: phone, fax, mail, email, around there. Now they're getting excited about EDI, electronic data interchange, in there. Okay, so we've got a lot, and company A is going to talk to company B, and it's going to have all those different ways of describing it. And then there's company A got to talk to C and D, and supplier B, and then they're going to get some product data. There's bank, they're a freight company. Well, it gets kind of confusing pretty quick when we throw in everybody else's communication. Say, is there a business opportunity in there? The answer, of course, is it's PowerPoint. So yes, there we go. We have Envera sitting as a hub, 100% metadata based. It is a phenomenal concept and was implemented extraordinarily well by the team that put it on. They only had to implement and access a type of company, a type of software. So they might have SAP, but they hadn't done PeopleSoft. When they did PeopleSoft, they could then send their salespeople out to other PeopleSoft customers and say, it's going to cost you very little to get involved in our hub. What meant sorry, what were the effects of on the industry of Envera having this kind of information? Well, this was the second part of the business proposition. Sure, it was cheaper to do it this way, but look what they advertised to certain types of customers that were involved in it. Again, they said, look, I found the business intelligence, logistics, regulatory reporting, all of these different types of things. They could tell when the demand for shipping oxygen was rising across the country. It was a tremendous insight going on, required a lot of time and effort to maintain it, no question about it, but it was still extremely valuable from an intelligence perspective on this. I hope you're getting this because it's really exciting what they were able to do. Again, what was done here is reusable in a lot of different domains. So it was not just for one-off that they did this. The key to it, unfortunately, was that it was sold as a success. The investment was a success. Everybody exited. And the company that bought it also bought an auction house at the same time, and they really didn't understand this metadata stuff. So they kind of gave up on it, whereas the auction house was exciting for a little while and became the full focus of their attention. That was bought by a third company, and they didn't know what to do with it. So literally this wonderful set of technology is now existent in somebody's basement in Houston, Texas, is my understanding of this. Such a sad case study on this. Again, it's been done once before. We don't have to do it a second time. I mentioned before that it was important to understand that part of this was governed by federal law. So read quickly and you'll get the overall focus in here. Again, on 1/14/19, the president signed something called the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policy Act, FEBA. I don't even have it spelled right there. Title II is the Open Data Act, and said that three things: all federal data is now open by default. In the past, you were able to specify a subset of your data and make that as open, requiring relatively confined metadata management. We're responding to this, so we're going to put this data out and keep it up in one way. No problems agreeing to it. All of a sudden now it's been turned completely on their head, where all of the data is open by default. And a second requirement is added to it: non-political chief data officer functions are required. That data officer must be separate from the chief information officer by law on this. And that they're to use open data and open models in policy evaluation. That just means if they decide they're going to start off and decide that school type A is better than school type B, I don't know about these things, I'm making up an example here, they have to specify a priori the data that they've collected that they're going to use and the model that they're going to use on this. And you'll notice at the bottom there, it says penalties are higher than HIPAA, which is usually enough to scare people because most people think of HIPAA and think of jail. The key effect on this is that the federal government is mandated to use metadata around best practices, around glossary and term bank and controlled vocabularies that they have in place to come up with this. It's a tremendous change, and most organizations are working through it. But it is a non-trivial change. It will be a good change in the long run because we'll be able to get benefits just in the same way as an organization will do benefits. I managed to tie that together. How about that? Okay, increasing the value of strategic information, providing context for the data. We understand where it's going, what's happening with it, and what people are using it. Again, not to pick on anybody in particular, but I've been at situations where somebody has found a data item, written some code, and tried to make a policy decision, not understanding that the data they had was not in fact what they thought they had in there. Looking at onboarding in particular, training costs and lower staff turnover, because having the access as well as a good change management system will make people's, believe it or not, jobs satisfaction higher. Again, assisting business analysts by finding information. So having good intelligent search, AI supported search, role-based search important as well. Bridging the gap, I mentioned before, keeping track of data, metadata terms that were between the system, the technical, and the business users around all of that. And let's get quite clear, we've been not great about this, and we're trying to get better on that, and we're reducing the risk of project failure. So again, just more direct focus on the project, trying to get to where we're trying to provide value for the business in the long run. So we spent the last hour defining metadata in the context of data management, just understanding there is not yet a definite definition of data management. Did I really say that? Sorry. Data management on there, and that we're working our way towards it. But using data as metadata is really key for this, rather than this idea that there's a separate label that needs to go around and be decided for each data element out there. You now have an example of how to show on an MP3 how metadata is used and why that can be helpful. You can now translate into something that your organization will find valuable: faster, better, cheaper, or less risky. Again, 4 specific strategies here: treating it not as a noun, but as a use of the data in there. This will give you the ability to figure out what that use is valued at, and give everybody that's involved a good chance to check on the equation around that. Making sure that the language of data governance is metadata. There was just been, I literally got sent to the wrong city one time because somebody typed on an order that I was going to city XYZ instead of ZXY, and it happens. Glossaries and repositories need to be treated as capabilities, not as technology first, and building from these metadata building blocks. They have lots and lots of resources that are available. And if you start to feed your AI with these components, the AI will now start to be able to spit out information that is useful to you, jump-starting your metadata efforts. Oh, you mean it looks like this? As I've seen it happen several times. It's just been fabulous in terms of the available. Anyway, jump starting is really, really key. If you're not investigating it, you run the risk of just spending long time on there that you don't have to. Understanding the application's benefits and sources gives us the ability to focus in on that interoperability and put a value on it on this. And while we're getting ready for a couple of questions on this, I'll give a couple program takeaways on this. First of all, again, while we say data about data, as a general definition, great. I would actually say, depending on who you're having the conversation with, make it data about your data, and that will sort of personalize it and get them focused in on, well, maybe there is something here I ought to pay attention to, instead of, oh my God, the word metadata scares me on here. It's not just a type of data. Again, I've emphasized that, but it unlocks the value of data. And again, say even Gartner says they need to have management attention on it. The question, of course, of how much. You've got 5 people each making 6 figures on, and you can't show a return on investment. That's going to be a problem for you. The question is how to get something started or put your arms around an existing effort so that you're able to come up with different valuations on all of that. We've sort of talked about this in general, but metadata is, if we're not asking the right question, it's a problem. But it really is a focus on what, sorry, not about what, but more on the how. So, for example, do I have metadata would be a question that I would ask when I showed up in a strange city first time saying, hi, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. And I could literally find out within the first 5 minutes or so what type of facility I was dealing with. Most part, extremely capable and extremely I'm looking for a word. They were very careful, meticulous about maintaining their metadata on this, and it was a matter of national security. So it was well worth the effort that these guys, these teams put into it. So again, it's not really the what, nor about how are we getting the data to, what is the context we're putting around this data, so that you know whether it's the white mice and the dolphin having fun with us, or whether there's something even more interesting going on about this. Metadata needs to be the language of data governance in order to keep it focused. You'll find that you'll reduce redundancies that are going on, as well as improve communications all the way around. And what's really fun is that your work products will become useful to others. You'll have somebody coming to you at some point and saying, hey, you made a model of something that I was doing a couple months ago. Do you have a copy of that left? I'd like to try to work with that. You'd be really surprised on that. It really is the idea of a problem well specified is half solved, and having that aspect of there is just absolutely critical. Your primary question as a data professional is, should we include this item within the scope of our metadata practices? Because if there's value and it's real clear that there's value, then we do it. We're not going to do it just to collect data all the way around. So with that, we're just right back at the top of the hour, and I'm leaving you with a couple of references that can point you to some more information on all of this on here going forward, and draw your attention to our next month's webinar, which will be data quality, focus in there on the 9th of September. Hey, Shannon, are we back up to the top for you?
Perfect, as always. Thank you so
Uh,
much, Peter, for another great presentation. Really appreciate it. And if you have questions for Peter, feel free to put them in the Q&A panel. You can find that icon in the bottom middle of your screen or in the top toolbar. If you are in full screen mode, I'll have all the icons and the reactions going on. It's my favorite thing about the upgraded platform
oh
that
my
we've done
goodness,
here.
I've never seen this before, actually. Yeah, I'm quite
It's
touched.
new,
Thank you,
yeah.
guys. Now, hopefully it's
Yeah.
not AI just massaging my ego here, right?
I assure you it is not. Yeah, no, it's we upgraded our platform. So um yeah, diving in here, Peter, lots of questions coming in. So uh, you uh so can you speak to the importance value of organizing metadata as well as experience increased demand to deploy AI powered predictive analytics models?
A really good question. I'm just making a note here. So first of all, let's go back a couple slides here to get the idea. And I didn't address it directly in the presentation. I'll certainly will do it for next year. Um, but the idea that you've got this understanding here that needs to occur before you do any AI on this. So again, we have different organizations may maintain different types of architectures to support answering different problems, but that the real metadata use must be I don't want to say perfect, but good at this level here, where the business, the technical, and the systems all share that same vocabulary in there. Because if you don't have that done there, and you try to then import that into an artificial intelligence, disaster, right? So make this like a checkoff, a formal checkoff in your sheet, that you have examples from each group that sit down and say, yes, this is the way we understand it, how we use it, and we have a shared common understanding. And that data can now be utilized for artificial intelligence in there. Again, you've heard the GIGO, that stands for goodness in, goodness out. So you'll try to get everything all in one place. Great question, though, highlighting the importance of, if we don't have the metadata right, nothing the AI does will be understandable. That said, I'll take another minute here. And the real interesting part is that the AI understands, because it's built on top of an OWL type of language. So when you start to specify things in that formation, it oftentimes understands the tags that you're using in a way that's very helpful to you around all of that. So once again, this understanding, the shared understanding between these three components here will be very important for the organization to succeed in doing things from an artificial intelligence perspective. Wow, that was like a essay answer question there, but yes, great question, and I really appreciate it.
Indeed, it is a great question. And there's another question here too. Peter, I appreciate framing metadata as a tool for enhancing the value and usability of data. What recommendations do you have for organizations that cannot afford fancy data governance tools like the Atlants, Calibras? And there's an additional comment here. One of the attendees answered the question that has also had a lot of thumbs up. So let me add that in there. The recommendation is you can also try Chat GPT and Copilot to develop a simple UI for capturing important metadata. It can be connected to Excel and a database to store this info. Start with a small basic set of metadata items. So the question, then there's a pre-answer.
Yeah, and the pre-answer is superb. Exactly the guidance I would have given them as well. what's happening in artificial intelligence is that it's becoming a personal assistant and you're figuring out how to use it. But let me just give you a vision here, and I want to get off of this. Well, imagine if the slide was done properly in an organization. So somebody had actually taken the time to put a business glossary together from a metadata perspective in there. You getting ChatGPT or whatever flavor of the month that your organization has purchased, that your organization will be able to utilize safely. Again, we'll define safely according to your security people's needs. This will give you the ability, properly utilized, to maintain this environment going forward. Again, you can ask it the question in a couple of months, which meeting was it that we were at where we decided to implement policy Y, whatever that happens to be. And that can come directly out of this if you decide to put that much information into it. I now know groups that start fussing at team members when they get off of script because they want to get this, the AI summaries and the AI being able to utilize and unquote understand what's going on in these meetings is absolutely off the charts. It doesn't come easily. It takes some time. The more time you put into it and the more time you as a team put into it, the more utility you will get back out of it. But yes, it is a pleasure to have an organization that has been careful with this, and you can go back through their notes literally years and find out which meeting this policy was done and what sort of people were, and was the meetings become increasingly attended or decreasingly attended over time without having to pre-specify all of this in advance. This is something that the AIs can do and do very, very well. I do not have an example here for you, but I thank whoever put it in. I'm sure there's been work done. If not, there's really, really good possibilities there. I'm pretty sure I've seen this out in the wild already. Anyway, Shannon, a great question. Thank you so much.
Indeed. So many great questions coming in too. So since metadata can also have sensitive information, securing it is equally important. So can you provide comment on that?
Well, yes, I'm looking at data management as generally providing data to people that need to have it. But of course, there's another side to this as well, which is that we want to make sure that only people who are supposed to get to it can actually get to it. So from a metadata perspective, once again, your environment could be potentially classified or potentially unclassified or a mixture of both that are in there, just to put one aspect of sensitivity on top of it. That's going to require, in general, more data management, more metadata management to support that type of environment than not. Again, it's the kind of thing that says within our organization, certain aspects of these pieces of information should be shared according to some sort of role-based security policies that we put in place, permitting intelligent management of sensitive information that way. Beyond that, there's certainly going to be exceptions, things that will come out unexpectedly, but it's generally considered to be the best place to be practicing within that. And the NIST BRISC framework is certainly a good place to start out. If I have that reference right, Shannon, I'm not positive. Our wonderful audience will correct me if I don't have it exactly right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anybody has a counter
What
to
is the
that
NIST
reference.
security framework? Somebody will pop it in the chat
Yeah,
for us.
I'll look it up. But while that's happening, let me move on to the next question here. So, Peter, do we need to keep updating the metadata when there are changes in organizations or in organization like merger, migration, or org changes, so that since metadata cannot be static as data about your data definitions?
Really good question and very practical. In addition to that, metadata is often practiced in this highly theoretic fashion here, or even if you were remembering this type of implementation we were in at one point in our development, yes, this data changed. There were people who were qualified to manage the card catalog updating. And from a metadata perspective, it is absolutely unsuspecting. Again, your environment is going to change over time. Yes, of course. And so the way to manage that properly over time is to have a good change management system. And I'm sorry to keep going back to the same diagram here, but it really does address this. Many organizations are just not able to maintain all of this information themselves, and only document this information when they're answering a specific type of question. With the number of automated or semi-automated tools that are out there now, I think that only the largest organizations require the type of documentation here. I will give you a very specific example, one that didn't get a chance to work on, but would have been a great one. And that was the two nuclear aircraft carriers that were being built in the Northrop Grumman shipyard, just about 100 miles southeast of me. They called us up and said, hey, we'd like you to do configuration control management on this, because our Navy has come up with a directive that says these ships must be more maintainable. Now you have to understand that these ships, the two forget which president they were named after, class ships were all set up, but they were all individually done. Each piece of equipment on it was different from all the other equipment on the other series of ships that were in that series that were there. And so the Navy, by requesting that it be better maintainable, more maintainable, was saying we want lower operating cost on these things so it doesn't take so long. Again, back to our question, which was a really good one. If this loop that I'm showing on the screen here is updating on a regular basis, the ideal situation, of course, is to have it automatically update. And there are technologies, and for organizations that are in that place, you should definitely go check out some of these technologies that are out there working in this area. Just monitoring your environment. When something changes, it lets it know. So it's a sort of automatic background process. You have to make sure, of course, that somebody reads the log and gets the human beings that are involved in that particular set of changes also in the loop, or else it will work well at all. You'll think you're talking about X, and X will have changed to Y many, many years ago in order to do that. If you don't have that, where it tends to occur in most organizations is when you go in to maintain some aspect of the system. And one of the branches of the military did it this way. It was very effective. They knew what they knew, and they knew what part they hadn't updated, and so they knew who to talk to, and so they had all of that planned, but it was definitely running behind rather than in real time. You present a great problem, and I wish Shannon and I could provide you all the wonderful answers, but I think that you've got a general idea that updating metadata is either going to be done automatically, which is great, but complex and expensive, or semi-automatically, where you go in and focus on it as an area of re-engineering, or not at all, which it just leaves. Again, I recall getting paper responses from a vendor, paper maps, Shannon, that came from a vendor because we had bought their ERP, and the maps, they also included information in there about what was wrong with the maps. Even though they provided the maps, they also provided information, metadata, about how the metadata that they were sending us, supposedly to be utilized in these systems, was in fact not perfect, but they had a way of getting it there. Long-winded answer in there, but it was a really good question. Thanks for asking.
Great question. And I love a good paper map. I mean, I'm just saying.
I can remember we unveiled ours at George Mason University in the 1990s, early 1990s. They had the biggest projection screen around, and that's what we needed to have for it.
I love it. How tech has evolved. All right. Well, moving on to more great questions here. What's one emerging trend in metadata that will most impact AI in the next 3 to 5 years?
Great question. You guys are really on fire today. So let's go back to when you look at the goodness in, goodness out model dictated by artificial intelligence. All four of these can be critically important to your efforts getting started. That said, we'll spend a minute on each one just so that you've got an idea. When you, starting at the last one, you build from existing understood components, building blocks. It's like using cinder blocks instead of individual bricks to build your building with. Cinder blocks, their properties are known and understood. The perhaps variety of bricks that you bring may not provide a stable enough foundation for that. The glossaries and repositories, again, is the idea that we need to make sure that that aspect of things is as automated as possible, that the artificial intelligence knows what you mean when you use a term and how those terms are linked into your larger organizational strategy. Making, of course, metadata language of data governance. Again, it's just, if you use 6 terms to describe it, the AI is going to try to figure out which one and waste its time. If you use 1 term to describe it, the AI will focus on the outcome and your results much more likely. And finally, again, notice that even AI itself is a use of metadata, use of data. And so in that sense, metadata and AI are synonymous. Boy, I thought we'd ever get there, Shannon. That's quite a profound thought. So emerging trends around all of this is that it's going to make you individually more productive. And more importantly, I hate to put it in competitive terms, but there are some industries out there that are discovering that they can put the squeeze on. And if you're not willing to have metadata really enhance by that a lot of speed, what you do on a daily basis, they're going to find somebody who can. And there are good people out there. So unfortunately, the divide is starting to grow. It's not a steep learning curve to learn this AI stuff, but it is really important that you do that, because again, your job won't be taken by AI. Your job will be taken by somebody who knows how to use AI better than you do. I know you've heard that one before. What do you think, Shannon? Emerging trends?
Oh, yes,
Tell me what Bitcoin's going to be tomorrow.
right. Yeah. I'll ask AI that.
There
Um,
you go.
that's what I would use AI for now, is to ask those kind of trends. Um, trends about itself, the pun, the irony there. Um, so Peter, I had to look up the word gerund, and it said that it functions as a noun, but the way you said it, I think it's not a noun, and I didn't understand the analogy. Can you explain further?
Good question. Unfortunately, I'm not a great English person, but let me jump to the slide and we will take a look at it together. Let's see. It's a gerund. It's the
Oh yeah, sorry, Jared.
pronunciation of it. I
I'm
only know
just
that
getting
because I had
fancy
it
with my.
corrected to me. See, that's the fun part about all this. Why have I lost my?
It's right there. Oh, yeah, it was there.
There it is. Yes. Okay. Good. Da da da. Look like an old guy on here. Where's my gerund slide? It says the best. By the
I
way,
had to
did you
look it up
catch
too.
that?
Yeah.
Hit the Metallica logo. These guys were great.
Oh, there was a
Come
slide that you were
on.
on. Your
There it is.
metadata. Yeah.
There we go. All right. Again, the problem with using metadata the way it's typically presented, and again, my hats off to this company that did it with metadata, making it look slightly Metallica-ish. I hope Metallica doesn't get mad at them and come after them for copyright infringement, but it was a really good use of this, and that's one of the reasons they should be allowed to use it. It just gets people's attention to this. You're certainly more approachable, whether you like Metallica or not. You know they're a brand name that is worth hundreds of billions around the world out there. And again, if you tell metadata, as most people do, that it's a type of data, they will go around and look at everything and try to answer the question instantly. Is it being used as to describe another part of your data? When the answer to that is no, then it's not metadata, right? Well, that's pretty silly. Again, the idea should be it's a gerund, which is a form that's derived from a verb, but functions as a noun. The word asking, for example, do you mind my asking you, is using a verb as a noun. And metadata is like that. It should be metadata-ing. But of course, that wouldn't work out nearly as well. This, we're so good at naming things in IT or in technology as well. It's over and over again. So hopefully that gerund helps. Maybe somebody who's more familiar with the English language can give me a better description of this, which we'll gladly thank you and give you credit for on this. But again, it's the use of the data, not a type. And that's really, really critical for this. Shannon, back over to you.
Yeah, I'm not an English major either, but I had to look it up. But found a couple of links that are interesting where it is a verb and a noun. I'll send those over. And it would not be the first time that, technology has influenced the English language and changed the English
Oh my
language.
goodness.
So, Peter, so we've got about 10 more minutes here. What would be a good starting point for a company that wants to implement metadata but currently lacks the internal knowledge or expertise to do so?
What a great question again. And I really hope that is something that you're able to take away with this. Something that is very powerful is your own ability to do things. So I'll just go back to the Nokia story. Remember, what they did here was much more important culturally, saying it was not bad to ask questions, it was good to ask questions, and it was good to build a common vocabulary amongst the entire population of the organization. And they did a fantastic word of it that kept them limited technology to a single web page and a browser that they would functionally use as a search engine. They would search this web page, and when they found the proper definition for it, they would go, okay, this is what it means. The organization has agreed upon this. It is such a important concept for all of this. When you look at starting place, if you're not talking the same language, you have an immense challenge over and of itself. We're going to talk next month about data quality, but you'll see there's a whole series of reasons for including the standardization of these data items in their organizationally. This organization, Nokia, had to devote a Friday afternoon meeting, a couple hours each day. They would get down and sit down, not each day, each Friday. They would get in and go through these things and review them, and then repost the single web page. No technology needed whatsoever. You can do an immense amount with this before you need to ever add any set of technology into your metadata environment. It is a terrific way of getting started with this organizationally. There have been a lot of organizations that have tried it and done very, very well on this. And again, literally, it's a single web page, a single way of describing this. We added the information, we used the search bar, finding it, we link to it, and everybody gets the same information all at once. The hard part, again, is this: what do we do in the way of asking questions? Can we get in there and make it okay for everybody to actually try and figure out where the questions come from? Again, Shannon, sorry I dove into that quite a bit, but I think that'll help people get a good starting place.
Well, it's an important question and answer, so thank you. So Peter, we use medallion architecture frameworks and are tempted to capture metadata across the bronze, silver, and gold layers to help the different audiences, engineers, data scientists, and BI folks. Is this too much, or do we need to enforce that capture?
Well, to get everybody on the same page within the environment that you're describing, there are well-defined architectural layers that everybody knows and agrees on the meaning of the bronze, silver, and gold. I forget exactly. But everybody knows that data scientists stick with the gold layer and business users stick with another layer, and this sort of thing in there. the question goes to a very astute use of metadata. The idea is that within translations that occur between each of these functions, there's some business rationale for it. And that understanding that business rationale is really important for the organization to be able to maintain that. So again, sort of like the crown jewels that are embedded throughout the rest of the organization, all starting from a very small place, and all, of course, dependent entirely on metadata within that context. I think I answered the question for you. If you didn't quite get it, reach out and I'll happily take another crack at it.
Good, thank you. So how can metadata help us identify AI-ready data sets faster? If so, or can it? And if so, how?
Let me start out with the premise of testing software. And I know that's sort of jumping off a little sideways, but the goal of testing software is to prove it doesn't work. You've really succeeded if somebody pays you to find errors in it and you actually find errors in it. So we need to move from that up into the AI component, which is not quite the same as software testing, but nevertheless can benefit from the same practices that are associated with it. And the idea here is that you would jump into a software, excuse me, a metadata environment here and use AI to try to find existing aspects of bias, existing components that seem off, things that are read but not said, if you will. Be amazed at how well it all starts to come back together in there. So the idea of trying to use AI to manage your environment is a tremendous opportunity. It should really be done by a combination of the technical people who know how to get access to the systems and the data people who know what they're called. Again, we go back to the little triangle I described before, making sure everybody understands that. And when we have data that is of suitable utility, and I'll come back to that in just a second, then we can move it or brand it or otherwise delineate it so that we know we're getting things from the right point in time, the right place, the right reason, the right stage of the life cycle. Again, it's going to depend, and you're going to be the most expert at being able to answer those questions that are there. But once you've cleared a data set and figured out what those wonderful prompts are you need to go in, and you have good trust in your information. By the way, again, the way you should try to prove it is to ask it to play up certain types of things that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of otherwise. I know we're getting long in the wind on this, Shanna, here, but yes, metadata can be an important component getting your AI to understand which data sets that are there. And I hope you're not like, virtually too many organizations are, where they say to the person, don't tell, but all of our data here is of unknown quality. That's certainly not something that you want everybody to be able to go in and take a look at. That's unfortunately very, very bad information. You'd want to try to come up with something that would be a larger, better approach to the overall process in there. There's just so many things that are happening. Again, the metadata is sort of your foundational pieces where the glue needs to be in order to make sense out of the rest of it. I went on too long, Shannon. Sorry.
Question for that, and I'm going to challenge you because we've got less than 2 minutes here. Um, where do you see human oversight being essential in AI-driven metadata creation?
The key to that is to make sure that human beings are properly incentivized to do the things they're good at. And this gets us off into a really interesting topic, which we could go for an hour on, Shannon, of neurodiversity. But different thinking people oftentimes make excellent people who are able to go in and help out at different parts of the life cycle regardless of where it is. So yes, absolutely. It's a fascinating area, and hopefully we'll learn from it.
Indeed. Ooh, I love it. Challenge met and accepted and met. Well, Peter, thank you as always for a great presentation. Um, I've learned something every single time. Now I am obsessed with this word that I'm going to go like research until the end of the day, I'm sure. Um,
Sorry.
and no, it's good. It's good. I like learning, as we all do. So, Peter, thank you so much. And thanks to all of our attendees for being so engaged in everything that we do. Really appreciate it. Just great questions. And just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday for this webinar with links to the slides and links to the recording. Thanks, everybody.
So look
Hope
forward
y'all
to it. Thanks, everybody.
have a great day.
Bye all.